I don't know if we're live, but I'm doing the introduction and then you're doing your introduction.
Okay, good.
So I think we're live. So if we are live, thank you everybody for joining us for our event on the Fountainhead, The Courage to Face a Lifetime. So the reason we're having this event is because in a few days we are going to be launching our new series on our YouTube channel. One of the things I'm most proud of that we've done, our series, The Psychology of the Fountainhead Characters, and the people who are involved in that show are our speakers today. So Nikos will be chairing this, and before we get started, I will say to the people on YouTube, now that we are monetized, and because, as I like to say, we don't just preach capitalism, we also practice it. If you want to support us throughout this show at any point, we'll appreciate your super chats very much. We will possibly take some super chat questions because this is a 2-hour event. Unlike the daily objective, we have the time for that. But that is not the priority. So we're prioritizing live questions from the Zoom audience, and as super chat questions come in, if they do, we will take them. Assuming it's not hundreds of them. So our chair today, Nikos.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for being with us. So the topic is the title is the famous line from the Fountainhead, which is the courage to face a lifetime. So the theme today, so just make something clear, today is not an introduction to the series, The Psychology of the Fountainhead. It's mostly to see how the Fountainhead has influenced the lives of the people who are the participants in this project and our speakers today, and also to see how you can draw lessons from the Fountainhead to apply in your life. Not in the way, oh, Rourke did this, I'm gonna do this, but on a more, let's say, general philosophical level. So the speakers, we've got Andrew Bernstein. Andy is a professor of philosophy, but also an author, and he has written many books. The two latest ones, A Dearth of Eagles, which is a fictional work which involves Greece as well, not that it matters, and also Heroes, Legends, Champions, Why Heroism Matters. So then we have Gena Gorlin. Gena is a psychologist, but she's also teaching psychology, and she has applied psychology to issues related to objectivism. And I can tell you that her talk last year in Ocon made a person who I know and is not, you wouldn't call them the sentimental type, made him shed 1 tear or 2. So I would encourage people to go and check it out. Then we have Josh. Well, I don't want to expose that person because he has this persona of, the tough guy. So then we have...
those were the first 2 tears he ever shed in his life. So you can be very proud of yourself.
I'll take it.
There you go.
Then we have Josh. So Josh is a positive psychologist. He's running Resurface UK, which is a group which is dealing with trauma, and they are having some retreats where Josh puts these ideas into practice. We've seen him doing very well lately. It was reported, I think, in the Telegraph and other newspapers. Not that this is why he's good, but also this says something. And also we have Susana Milgram. So Susana is a professor of English, but also I think of philosophy. If I'm right. No, okay, but I'll stick to English then. And I couldn't bring the books because Susana has contributed, if I'm not mistaken, to each and every of the guidelines to the main fiction works of Ayn Rand. So the book with the essays on the Fountainhead, on Atlas Shrugged, and on We the Living. Am I right, Susana?
An Anthem.
An Anthem. All right. I haven't got the one on Anthem. That's why I forgot it. And we were, see what you're missing if you're not a member of Ayn Rand Center UK. So on Fridays, we are running a reading group. Andrea is running a reading group on We the Living. And last week we had Susana, who contributed to the discussion. Now this is for all members. So here's another reason why you shouldn't miss being a member of Ayn Rand Center UK. Enough with my introduction. I shouldn't be doing the introduction. That's why I haven't prepared. So sorry if I missed some of your credentials. So let's begin with Andy. Andy can't be here for the whole time. So we are starting with him. And if you have a question specifically for Andy, make sure you ask it on time because he'll have to leave in like 50 minutes. Am I right, Andy?
Yeah, I have a class. I have 2 classes actually at Marist at 3 o'clock. So yeah.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Well, since I'm at home, the floor is mine and the walls and the ceiling also, Nikos. But I get your drift. By the way, don't forget Catman, right? The Capitalist Manifesto. Can't forget that book. But thanks for the introduction, Razi and Nikos, and it's a thanks for having me on. It's Heart of a Pagan. My first, I've been threatening for years. I'm going to rewrite that book one day, and I intend to, because I don't think the story is nearly as good as it could be given the 2 main characters. But all things in time. Anyhow, the topic today is the Fountainhead, and the some of the autobiographical points about the Fountainhead. I was lucky enough. I first read the Fountainhead when I was 16. I was a junior in high school, and I want to give a shout out to my teacher, Jay Hyman, who was a great guy. James Madison High School. I had enormous respect for him. He was an objectivist, and he was discussing in a hygiene class. He was a PE teacher in a hygiene class. Blasted through the hygiene curriculum very, very quickly. And this is 1968. So, the Vietnam War is raging and there's riots in city streets and campuses. And Mr. Hyman applied, he discussed objectivism and then applied objectivist principles to, topical issues. And I was just hooked right away. I mean, it made so much sense to me. I mean, I had grown up in a very crazy family, and the world is too often crazy, and more often crazy than sane. And here, Ayn Rand's philosophy, and then the way Mr. Hyman applied it to, controversial issues in our day just made so much sense to me. So that summer, I read all of Ayn Rand's novels. I didn't have to go far to find them because my oldest sister is a reader, and she had all of Ayn Rand's books. And I was just hooked. I mean, I knew right away that this was the most important thing in the world. And to this day, more than 50 years later, The Fountainhead remains my all-time favorite book. Fiction, nonfiction, doesn't matter. Fountainhead's my personal favorite. And I think if I live to be as old as Methuselah, which I'm not counted on, by the way, but if God comes down and says, Bernstein, we need you, yes, sir, God, give me all those years, and I think The Fountainhead will remain my all-time favorite book. And one reason for that, of course, is what is that noise in the background?
Someone needs to mute.
Someone is unmuted. That's a mystery.
Yeah, I don't know who that is, but I did make all the speakers co-hosts, so you can mute and unmute yourselves now.
All right, it's mildly annoying. You can hear that, right? Doesn't sound like somebody had the TV on. But anyhow, and one of the reasons that The Fountainhead is my all-time favorite book is because of Howard Roark. And I've given a lecture and wrote a TOS objective standard essay on why I think Howard Roark is the greatest hero in world literature, if we leave Atlas Shrugged aside, because Atlas Shrugged is sui generis. But in Atlas Shrugged, John Galt remakes the world. In The Fountainhead, Howard Roark doesn't do any such thing, doesn't try to do. What he does do is he carves out a rational niche in his own life in a society that is somewhat, certainly at times irrational and corrupt. But he's able to live a very independent life, very, very creative life, very rational life in accordance with an Ayn Rand hero in that society. And that to me, it speaks to me. It's almost like the Goldilocks principle. It's like other people's, other than Ayn Rand, other writers' novels are too small, and Atlas Shrugged is too big, but The Fountainhead is just right. The Fountainhead is all about, what one person could do in his own life to live creatively, independently, and, and joyfully. And so to me, Howard Roark, like I said, if we leave Atlas Shrugged aside, because the role of the hero in Atlas Shrugged is so unconventional, so different. In terms of more conventional literature, I think Howard Roark's the greatest hero in world literature. So he's an enormous inspiration to me. Now, related to that, so since my family was really crazy, I won't bore you with any of the details. Many years of work in Gina's profession, in psychotherapy, I wasn't always the paragon of mental health that you see before you today. So it's been many years of hard work in psychotherapy, and I'm still at it. And it's an expensive proposition, let me tell you, but it's worth it. Anyhow, so I weaned myself, as an old girlfriend of mine put it, who was very insightful. She was a psychologist herself, by the way. I weaned myself on literary heroes, and real life heroes too. George Washington, for instance, one of my first, and early heroes, slave owner. We always have to remember that, but a giant in so many other ways. But so I'm reading, early 1960s. I'm 10 years old. Ian Fleming is alive. He's writing the James Bond series. This is before any of the movies were made. And so of course, being a hero worship, I was always able to sniff out, any books, about heroes. So I read the James Bond corpus, loved the James Bond books, still do. Ian Fleming's plots are simple. They're relatively short. You got a real hero. And but I never wanted to be a secret agent. And and one of my another book that I've loved since I was young and still love and will always love is Jack Schaefer's immortal novel Shane. I mean, it's so benevolent, and Shane is such a hero. So is Joe Starrett. But I never wanted to be a gunfighter. I always wanted to be a writer. And so, from my earliest memories, I wanted to be a writer. And so I read The Fountainhead. Now, Howard Roark was an architect, not a writer, but he's an intellectual hero. And Ayn Rand showed me why you could be a hero in your own life as an intellectual. You don't have to be one of these tough guys that goes out, and physically, brawls with bad guys. In fact, Ayn Rand's novels show the real battle is intellectual. The real battle is to win the intellectual battle, for reason and egoism and individualism and capitalism. That's the real battle. And then, having tough guys, like Navy SEALs, and guys like that, they're real heroes, no doubt. And you have to, sometimes you got to win wars in support of liberty, but they're heroes because they're risking their lives to fight for a certain philosophy, freedom of the mind in a free country. It's the battle for freedom of the mind, intellectually and morally. That's the fundamental battle. And so Ayn Rand inspired me in so many ways, in the Fountainhead, and to try to be the hero of my own life and overcome the various problems that I had growing up and living in a crazy world. But we all have that problem, but coming out of a crazy family. But also the leitmotif for this particular discussion, the courage to face a lifetime, that of course comes from the boy who always wanted to write music. And at the beginning of part 4 in The Fountainhead, one of the most beautiful and touching and inspiring scenes that I've ever read and that I think has ever been written, and a scene that only Ayn Rand could have written, when the boy has graduated college, he wants to be a composer, but the world around him, we understand, seems to be uninterested in the kind of great works that he wants to compose. The Peter Keatings perhaps looks like at a surface level that the conformists who sell their soul are the ones who rise to the top, maybe. And he wants to know that it's possible in this world, that you could live a creative life, live an artistic life, be true to yourself, and still achieve commercial success. And of course, it reminds me of Frank Sinatra singing "My Way." He said that I did it my way. That's a good theme for Howard Roark, isn't it? He do it my way, and the kid wants to do it his way and still reach success without selling his soul. And so he sees this beautiful, stunning panoply of buildings designed by Howard Roark, and he's thinking, well, even before he sees them, he's thinking to himself, don't work for my happiness, my brother. Show me yours. Show me that's possible. Show me that it can be made real in this world, and give me the courage. Give me the courage to do my own work. And of course, he sees it made real. Howard Roark provided it for him, and it shows him it's possible. Gives him the courage to face a lifetime. And it reminds me of my single favorite line from Atlas Shrugged, thought to herself by Dagny Taggart, as she climbs onto the station for the launching of the John Galt line, and there's a whole crowd here. And she said, well, why are all these people here? What are they here for? I'm the one who built the John Galt line. Reardon's the one who designed Reardon Metal. Why are all these people here? And then she realizes, of course they're here. It's right and proper that they should be here, because the sight of an achievement is the greatest gift that you can offer to, that a human being can offer to others. The sight of an achievement is the greatest gift you can offer to others. Howard Roark at Monadnock Valley offers that sight to the boy who always wanted to write music. Dagny Taggart at the opening of and Hank Reardon, the opening of the John Galt line, offer that sight to all the people who were there and who realize at some level that we need to achieve values in order to live and who want to live. And of course, Ayn Rand in the Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, her other literary works, her essays, and creating objectivism. Ayn Rand has offered that sight to us. There's so many values in the Fountainhead. The great story, the great character. Ellsworth too, he's a magnificent villain. The dialogue is just off the charts. I mean, Gail Wynand. Gail Wynand is one of the greatest tragedies in world literature, maybe the greatest tragedy in world literature, maybe even greater than Oedipus or Macbeth or Hamlet, certainly at that level. It's amazing. Ayn Rand tells this story as a secondary aspect of a novel that's about somebody else. She wrote maybe the greatest tragedy in world literature. This is extraordinary. And by the way, I'm on public record many times as saying, nobody criticizes Dominique Franklin around me. I know a lot of objectivists don't like her, but I fell in love with Dominique Franklin when I was 16. I'm still in love with her. And that's not just her beauty and her intelligence, although that's really attractive. It's her idealism. The way Ayn Rand stylizes Dominique, her love for mankind at his highest and best, her reverence for Roark's buildings, for Roark, for the Greek statuettes. This is Dominique can't respond to anything but man at his highest and best. It's her idealism that's so beautiful about Dominique, and I think is the main reason why Roark loves her. And there's no other woman in Roark's life, as Ayn Rand tells us. So this book is a great story, great characters. The theme is profound, but above all, for me, towers the figure of Howard Roark as the inspiration to be an intellectual hero, to be calm and rational, because I have a problem with anger, which goes back to my childhood, especially dealing with leftists, because they make me see red, if I could play on words there. And, Howard Roark's always been my exemplar. How would Howard Roark deal with these irrational people? And he'd reason with them. And if there was, at some point, if there was no possibility of reasoning with them, he would walk away. But you can't see Howard Roark yelling and screaming, being irrational. And so Howard Roark was always, an inspiration for me. He was an exemplar for me. He's my all-time favorite hero in my all-time favorite book, gave me the courage to face a lifetime. So I want to say thank you, Ayn Rand. A lot more I could say on that, but I think, we have many other good speakers here, so I think I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Andy. Gina.
So I was really thrilled to learn of some of the details of your story, Andy, that I hadn't heard before, including the role of psychotherapy and psychologically minded girlfriends in your development. Just a nice endorsement. So, and there were some interesting commonalities actually in your path and my path. So I've told the story so many times that I have probably a million versions of it in my head. So I'll try to shoot for the 10-15 minute version and see where we land. But I got to the Fountainhead. So I was actually also, I was at 15 as I think about it when I first read the Fountainhead. I read it because about a year earlier, I had been in a private school. This was my only year of private school where the education was a little bit more tailored to the student and there was a little bit more kind of individualized attention. And we were reading The Giver in English class. So if you've heard of it, The Giver is really a kid's book and I'd read it a million times. It's a pretty standard dystopia where color has been eliminated from the world and then this young person kind of rediscovers it. Anyway, and I and another student in the class came and complained to the teacher that we'd read this book a million times. And so she recommended to us a different book we could read instead, which was Anthem. And the way she presented it was, well, you know, there's this kind of older, more philosophical version of The Giver that you can read and maybe it'll challenge you in a different way. Okay, so that's how I came across Anthem. This was my first encounter with Ayn Rand. And I engulfed it in one evening. I remember when my dad brought it home from the library for me. And I even remember, I have this vivid memory though, the only witnesses don't seem to recall, so maybe I invented it in retrospect, but I remember turning to my dad before I'd even read the book, when I just saw the little excerpt about, no, I think I will, what must I say beside, where I read it and I felt a rush of emotion. And I remember saying, Daddy, this is my philosophy, without having any idea what I was saying. But, you know, it resonated right away. I read it and I remember the reaction I had in effect was, well, that was a once in a lifetime experience. There's never going to be another reading like this. And I was just so thrilled to have experienced it. And it didn't even occur to me to ask about other novels that this author had written, because my life experience up to that point, you know, I was the ripe old age of 14. Nobody does something like this twice. This is a fluke. I don't think I had that explicit, but clearly that was the assumption. But I, you know, filled out the little in-class essay exam and I turned in my my essay to the teacher. And as I was turning it in along with this other student, the teacher said, yeah, this is pretty much this was her peak. You know, after this, she kind of goes crazy. She comes up with some philosophy and, you know, the Fountainhead and this and that and objectivism, you know, but you guys read the best available work. So she just further reinforced my bias, but also it intrigued me to hear what she made up a philosophy. What is this? So I kind of just logged that in the back of my mind. And then a year later, I was in high school. I was a nerdy, awkward, overweight, depressed, confused teenage girl. And I was trying to figure out what social group I belonged to. And, you know, some of it felt kind of cliche, but also just deep down, I was profoundly lonely. I had tried on a few different hats. And if I'd tried being the kind of happy-go-lucky, ditzy, you know, friend to everyone, and that bore no really satisfying fruit socially. And I had tried being the kind of cynical, you know, martyr who everyone hates me, but at least, you know, at least I think deeper than the other students, and at least the teacher loves me, even though I get, you know, mocked and bullied and, you know, banana peels thrown at me on the bus. And so there really didn't seem to be any option in terms of a world for me to belong to. And at that point, between fall and spring semester, my freshman year, I was just searching for anything to read. And I was a reader, and like Andy, you know, I very much, I kind of raised myself on fiction and on fictional worlds, fictional characters, and I felt closer to my fictional friends in some cases than my real ones. And so I was searching around and I saw a reference to the Fountainhead in, of all things, a book called The Perks of Being a Wallflower, which is this kind of teen angst, kind of coming of age novel. And it jogged my memory and I thought, oh yeah, this is intriguing. And the quote was intriguing. And I think it was the quote, I think it was the undercurrent line, ironically, later I co-founded a publication that was also inspired by that line about an undercurrent kind of flowing through, where people were starting to notice his buildings and to commission more buildings like them. And so Rourke was kind of slowly gaining, an audience on a market. But it reminded me, and so I got the Fountainhead, and that was kind of the beginning of the rest of my life. The way that since the way I look back on it, and the way that it changed my life was that, I think in many of the different ways that a lot of us have experienced, many of the things that Andy talked about resonate, but I think the most distinct aspect of my reaction and my experience was actually Dominique's arc. And even though there was a lot I didn't understand, and the first time around I projected onto her shamelessly and probably projected onto every character, but what stood the test of time, even when I go back and I reread it now, was that there was something deeply resonant in Dominique, both in terms of her virtue and in terms of her error. And as she learned what she needed to learn, I kind of learned it along with her. And it's really notable that, the first line of the Fountainhead is, Howard Rourke laughed, right? He stood naked on the edge of a cliff. Reading that line, I assumed out of hand that he was about to jump to his death, because that's how scenes like that play out in fiction novels. That's the world that we live in. And that was the first expectancy violation of many, many consecutive sequential violations of one malevolent expectation after the next, which Dominique also had to experience, and I along with her, as we both kind of tested our own values against the world and came to slowly see that maybe evil and stupidity and secondhandedness didn't run the world, that maybe the world belonged to those of us who think and who love and who strive for greatness and who are idealists, as Andy said. And so I didn't maybe have to choose between being a kind of mindless ditzy person and being a lonely, frustrated martyr. Maybe there was a world and there were people out there like these fictional characters who were written by a real human person whose world I could actually, choose to be part of and whom I would want in my world. And the rest of my life has played out accordingly. And I've gone back many, many times to reread both, the whole novel, but also certain scenes. And for me, the kinds of scenes that are particularly tender and particularly resonate are scenes like, the one where Rourke is just hanging out with his friends at I think it's the Stoddard Temple Right building site. And they just experience that light, wordless camaraderie and sense of shared, idealism and purpose and joy and love that I certainly hadn't experienced up to that point, and that I had no idea what are the nutrients that go toward building or growing that kind of love and those kinds of connections. And this was my first glimpse of them. And the moments, certainly like the ones that Andy described, the boy on the bicycle scene was profoundly resonant for me in the same way and for the same reasons that kind of going through Dominique's journey with her was so resonant. But by the end, when Dominique herself, when she's cutting herself with the shards of glass that I couldn't have possibly begun to explain in words, kind of why that was the natural dramatic culmination of all of her conflict up to that point, and why she needed that experience in order to kind of fully set herself free. But I resonated so deeply with it on an emotional level, and I think I could better explain it now, but probably would still use the help of Shoshana and others who are literary experts. But but at an emotional level, and then the scene in which she's tearing up as she kind of does her own version of dynamiting Cortland, right? I don't want to give away the plot of our discussion, too much, but when Rourke notices the tears in her eyes as she's basically about to give Wynand his comeuppance, kind of to complete the arc of finally letting the world see and letting Wynand see that she's Rourke's lover, and being okay with all the intrusion that's implied, and all the having the story dragged through the papers, because she now really sees that it's not important, that Rourke is important, she's important, their life is important, and nobody can steal that from them. And yet she has tears in her eyes, and Rourke says he won't remind her later. And just the tenderness of starting to see it, but still feeling so hopeful, and in a way, it's still such a fragile discovery, but that it's only going to get stronger and surer with time. And that's what I've carried with me throughout the rest of my life. I don't know did I make it within the 10-15 minute window? Nikos, you're muted.
Yeah, so let me say about Gina that she has won the essay contest of the Fountainhead, if I'm not mistaken, 2 consecutive seasons. So if you don't follow basketball, the metaphor won't make sense, but it's something that only Maccabi and Olympiacos have done in the EuroLeague. So it's very rare for 2 consecutive seasons to win a very difficult contest. Anyway, how we go?
It's actually even more rare, as the example you gave proves, because she's the only person to win it twice.
That's not.
And after that, they started the Gena Gorlin rule, which is you can't win it more than once. So,
which earned me some really angry forum posts by high schoolers looking for scholarship money. I'll have you know. And I had to talk myself down from the guilt and self-blame that I had robbed them of their scholarship money. But anyway,
maybe those people should have actually read the Fountainhead before posting those angry posts, and then they.
Fair enough.
So here's a question for both Andy and Gina. So your presentation had the common theme, let's say, which is the book helped you in difficult situations and when you were not 100% sure where you were going. So in a way, it helped you to cope. So the question is this: for many people, probably including myself quite often, does this become an escapism? So it's like, well, this world sucks, but here's this other beautiful world. So it gives you inspiration. The problem is, at what point does this inspiration become a bit dangerous? So for example, well, anyway, you figure out what I'm talking about, right? So at what point does this inspiration go into contrast with the actual requirements of your life and the context of your life?
I mean, great question. I have seen the phenomenon you're describing. I've worked with people who have succumbed to versions of that phenomenon. And I think this is true of any source of inspiration, of any literary or romantic promise, right? Any symbol, any reminder of what's possible and of what you value, what you want, of the ideal, of the good, to the extent that it isn't immediately and constantly followed by action, right? And it's really easy to experience that disconnect, especially when, I mean, I can cite many different factors that kind of worked in my favor. And I also do take some pride in having made choices along the way, not all of them, courageous and good, but I think enough that I was able to muddle my way onto a better path. But I think there are lots of factors, like being in a much worse environment that, I had a pretty reasonably loving family. I had the opportunity to go to a great university, after high school. I had access to ARI and to this essay contest and to this world that I was very quickly able to connect to, which I think a lot of people either don't have or don't know that they have or could have. And to the extent that, and I was young, we were both young. I think that's a really critical piece of this, right? That it's not a coincidence. We both discovered this novel when we were mid-teens, right? And we still had our whole lives ahead of us. I've worked with people who discovered it when they already had a family, maybe a kid or two, and a job that they hate, but that they feel obligated to, continue working in for stability, but where they have a lot of real responsibilities that they have not the first idea how to begin to kind of crawl out from under. And their identity has been much more shaped around, premises that aren't entirely healthy or that aren't entirely their own. And they get a taste, like, to your point about escapism, they get a taste of a very different kind of world, different kind of life. And it can actually be extremely anxiety provoking, because the discrepancy becomes so salient and so emotionally, gripping. And yet there's not a clear action path from here to there. And so I've definitely seen it happen. And I think there are lots of different forms that can take. And sometimes it can be more of like a comfortable substitute. And that can also be really bad and really crippling, to the extent that, okay, well, I have my, novels that I can go and read and then privately hate the world and hate all the secondhanders that surround me, because Rourke would understand. And meanwhile, not really doing much, and meanwhile kind of hiding behind, the smoke screen. I could say a lot more about it, but
so not to try to squeeze a free session out of this question, but when you mentioned it's important to combine it with action, can you elaborate a bit on that?
Sure. It depends on the particular ways that you're stuck, and that the novel and its idea kind of show you a perspective that you didn't have before. But typically, insofar as you're getting a vision of independence, right? A vision of, this is my life and I'm going to do it my way. Actually translating that into acts of assertiveness, right? Standing up for yourself where you haven't been. These are some of the common forms I've seen it take. Standing up for yourself with family or with your colleagues, or, finding a job that is actually going to be more satisfying to you, even though it's going to involve some risk, it's going to involve some real uncertainty, and therefore require some courage, because you're not sure if you're going to do well in it. You're not sure if you're going to get rejected, laughed at, and kind of holding fast to that vision that, look, people I've worked with who struggle with this, often they'll have forgotten the scene in the quarry. It's kind of interesting, the things that stand out and are salient. Most people, I had forgotten until maybe the third or fourth reread, the scene where Rourke is tossing multiple drafts in the trash bin, right, as he's trying to get to a sketch he's satisfied with, and that's just a normal part of his process. That often isn't part of people's memory of Rourke or our image. And even if we remember, it's still a selective recreation of reality. So we're not seeing the crappy days he has where things are just kind of off and he's snapping at people, or where he's just he's having seasonal depression, or who knows, right, what a real life version of him might struggle with, and the ups and downs.
He's missing Dominique at times.
But like barely, right?
Yeah.
Like she kind of pops into his mind and then she pops back out, and he's back to loving his work and focusing on his building. And he doesn't really ruminate, seemingly. Right. So it's really easy to get this idealized picture, which is a kind of packaging of a real demanding but achievable ideal, and the fact that he's a fictional character, right? But gets kind of packaged together in people's minds. And they get this very kind of concrete, frozen vision of an absolutely impossible ideal that, especially from where they are in life, there's just no map that could get them, from here to there. And it becomes it kind of serves one of several psychological functions. It can either be a kind of pseudo value, or a pseudo, well, at least I have, my secret objectivism, and at least I have my contempt for the world. And that is somehow going to translate into, that's going to give me a kind of temporary fake self-esteem boost in the absence of real action steps toward actually becoming happier and more independent and finding the people and the things I want to do, right? That's what, and it can actually be really oppressive. And I've seen this time and again in clients I work with and friends, for whom it becomes this paralyzing kind of force of, in effect, impossible duty, ironically, because they both have this kind of frozen image in their heads of like a platonic ideal as they hold it, because it kind of just gets imposed onto their psychological, kind of duty premise-y kind of style of, feeling and thinking. And it just becomes the new duty premise, like thou shalt be Howard Rourke. And it just adds a whole bunch of guilt and shame and paralysis on of whatever they were struggling with before. It kind of heightens the discrepancy. It makes them feel that much more like they're failures, and they have and now they have a whole moral vocabulary for condemning themselves, which is clearly not the point of this novel or the philosophy, right? But that's how it functions given kind of the psychology that they came in with. And it actually ends up doing a lot of harm before it does any good, unfortunately.
Thank you.
I don't know if that was a deviation from your question, but
no, it makes sense. So we go to Andy, then we say goodbye to Andy. Bob, I'll get to your question after I get Andy, because Andy needs to go. So Andy, same question. So so it's not only the Fountainhead with you. You've written a whole book on heroism. So everyday life, specifically if you teach in a university like we do, quite often is far away from this world of heroism and heroes and big things. So at what point does it become this other place where you escape, and at what point is it a healthy, let's say, inspiration?
It's funny you should ask that, Nikos, because my class, or the two classes coming up, my 2 Intro to Philosophy class is coming up. Guess who we are studying today?
Immanuel Kant.
Well, we finished Kant. We're studying Ayn Rand. Oh. And, when near the end of the semester, and the fourth and final section on the syllabus is political philosophy. And we study Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Karl Marx, and now we're up to Ayn Rand. And so the students are going to get their dose of Ayn Rand. So, and even in the university humanities departments today, it's still not a fantasy to be able to teach Ayn Rand. And maybe soon, maybe next year, Kamala Harris will decide to, President Harris will decide to cancel, anybody teaching Ayn Rand in the universities. But as of, you're smiling, this is not funny. But as of right now, we're still free enough to teach Ayn Rand in the universities. And I make sure, when all those years I taught ethics, for 30 years, I used the Fountainhead as my main text. And it came in a context where we read Plato, we read Aristotle, we read Jesus, Sermon on the Mount, we read Kant, we read Marx. So it came in this very historic context, and the philosophy departments didn't complain. I stopped using the Fountainhead only because the kids can't read it anymore. The American education system has declined to the point where the students can't read the Fountainhead. They can't write essays anymore. But for 30 years, I did, and the schools never gave me any problem with that. So it's not a fantasy. Yeah. And by the way, remember, Ayn Rand described her school of writing as romantic realism, with emphasis in this context on realism. Romantic meaning, the characters have free will, and they have the capacity to choose values and act on those values and take charge of their own lives, make their life come out the way they want to, as opposed to, the naturalist school of social determinism, where the main characters are usually oppressed by whether dysfunctional families or, a suppressive society or both. And the realism part is, of course, that she's writing in the world as it is. She's not writing in some historical past or some sci-fi future. She's not writing fantasy like Tolkien did, and I love Tolkien's books, by the way. But it's a whole different genre. And so, the life of Howard Rourke is very applicable to somebody striving to be the hero of his or her own life today, or even not so melodramatic, just striving to live a fulfilled and happy life, to achieve eudaimonia in Aristotle's sense, a flourishing life in today's world. We're still free enough in the U.S., and I think in the Western world more broadly, we're still free enough to live out Howard Roark's principles. And so I think it's very realistic. It's not an escape. And I think Ayn Rand's philosophy, dramatized in the life of Howard Roark and her other heroes, a philosophy for living on Earth, is exactly that. It's not an escape from reality. It's an understanding of reality and giving us a roadmap and a code of values to live in reality, as long as we're free enough to do so. We're not a totalitarian state yet, and hopefully we will not be one. And if we don't become one, it'll be because of Ayn Rand's influence. So I gotta go teach these bright, eager young minds, what Ayn Rand has to say, teach them the theme of Atlas Shrugged. The mind is mankind's means of survival, and the mind requires political, economic liberty. The mind requires individual rights. So I slip in Atlas Shrugged into the political philosophy section. So anyhow, thanks for having me on, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much. Go do the good.
Take care, guys. Have a great day. Shoshana, sorry I'm going to miss your comments, but we've discussed the Fountainhead a little bit already, haven't we?
Right. So let's go to another written question, and then we go to Susana and Josh. So Bob asks, Gina, did you ever go back to your Anthem teacher to give your evaluation of Ayn Rand's subsequent works?
That's a funny question. So I actually did go back to her. I found her on Facebook. My goal was not so much to, rub in her face how wrong she was about Rand's subsequent works, but I actually had a specific goal, which was to find out how she came upon Anthem to begin with, because I knew ARI was kind of trying to retrace the steps of, what is the impact basically that the free books and their various programs, the essay contests, kind of these various programs are having. And so they actually asked me, like, did any of those programs in any way impact kind of my coming to Rand in the first place? And so I traced the steps and said, well, it was because of Mrs. Jedinak. So I don't know where she got it, but I wonder. And so I actually reached out to her on Facebook probably, a couple of years ago. And I told her the story that, that was the beginning of a really great life in effect for me. And that, I've done a lot of kind of studying and writing and thinking about it ever since. And I really was curious kind of how she came upon it. And she told me that it wasn't exactly, so it was not directly through the free books for teachers or, for schools program, but it was actually a function of like a table that ARI had at a teachers conference, basically like one of the national conferences of teachers of English, I think. And so it was actually connected to ARI's efforts, which was really cool to know that she'd basically gotten a batch of free anthems. And so that put in her mind, well, I guess I might as well use one of these, although I somehow still had to get it at the library. But anyway, so I shared with her that she seemed very happy for me. She didn't start a fight or anything about what, but Rand is crazy. And I feel very grateful to her, all things considered.
Thank you. So let's go now to Susana and then to Josh for, let's say, round 2 of our event. Susana. But you have to unmute.
Oh, you're muted.
Okay, right. I know. At the beginning, we were all speaking, and so I didn't know I had to unmute myself. Okay. Anyway, here's the thing. When I think about the Fountainhead, it's very hard actually to think about just discussing it for 15 minutes, because one of the things that I love about the Fountainhead is that it really is a full meal. I mean, we've got the main dish, we got the sides, we have everything, and everything is connected. How also, since my predecessors have said some of the things that I would like to say about the inspirational value of the book, I think we can take that as a given. What I think I would like to comment on, since everyone else discussed autobiography, is I read The Fountainhead for the first time just at this season of the year, because it was Thanksgiving break from my freshman year of college. And, for the train, I wanted to have a long book, and I thought I might need a long book for reading over break. And that was my book. And I liked it very much. Very much. My initial impression was that I didn't see that the ideas were extremely new, because I was in fact familiar with individualism from my family. And I know some of you have heard this story, but it's true. I was there Thanksgiving with the book, and my dad said, "Oh, that's a great book." And I said, "Yeah, it is." And he said, "I wrote a paper on that in college." And I said, "Really?" And he said, "And I think I still have it." So he went to the file cabinet and he pulled out a paper on the Fountainhead, and I saw that there was a little note attached to it. And the little note said, "I apologize for the lateness of this paper." And I thought, oh, my dad is one of those who does late papers. I never knew. But he said, "The reason this paper is late is that my wife, who is also a student, is 9 months pregnant. So I'm typing her papers as well as my own. And I'm the baby, right? I'm the baby that my mom was pregnant with while my dad was writing his paper on the Fountainhead." So, they didn't have time to read Atlas Shrugged when it came along some years later, although they did read it when I brought it to their attention. But, they loved the Fountainhead. I grew up with the ideas of individualism. It's your life, what matters to you, choose your own values. They even used to talk about sacrifice, and they said, "We would not put on you the burden of knowing that we sacrificed for you. We didn't give up anything for you. Why would we do that?" And so that was familiar, but the literary quality of the book was extraordinary. And I got that right away. I could see how wonderful this book was. And well, my favorite writers were the 19th century great novelists, Victor Hugo and Dostoevsky, and the 20th century American novelists were not like them. And here was a 20th century American novelist writing like my favorite writers from the 19th century. So I was very excited about that. And I really admired just the way everything came together. I read it directly. I didn't take breaks. So I read it. And so I saw how the opening and the closing come together. We've got Rourke alone, and then we've got Rourke alone again, but in a different kind of height. So there was the symmetry and development of that. And one thing that I actually got right away, because I knew I wanted to keep track of everything. And so I started writing down the dates. And I realized that Howard Rourke was born in 1900. And so if it's 1922, then we know how old he is. And if we know how old he is, we know what year it is. And I thought that was pretty clever, and I had not seen anyone do that before. And it wasn't obtrusive in the sense that it was a code you had to figure out, but she really knew when things were happening and wanted us to be able to keep track. And so it was grounded in reality. And then I found out that she was doing the obvious thing and then something more. When we met Peter Keating, I was not impressed with him. And I thought, is this, I was a little concerned because I thought this would be a waste of Howard Rourke as just the opposite of Peter Keating. That's not interesting. How are we going to maintain interest through the whole book? Because, beating Keating is not very interesting. And fortunately, we got rid of Peter Keating as any kind of threat or rival early and in principled ways. And then we got to meet the other antagonists. And that was interesting to me also, that it was not about Rourke versus this one or that one, but in a way, Rourke and how he's going to fit into the whole world. And that was a world and in time, and described in dramatic and vivid detail. So one of the things that I mentioned to a friend was that some books, you read them and you can skip things. You can't skip anything in here. Everything counts. Everything is related to Rourke's story and to what she's accomplishing in the book. So I was very, very impressed with it as a piece of writing. And one of the reasons I didn't read Atlas Shrugged right away is that I wanted to read it nonstop. And I wasn't sure that I had a spot to read it nonstop until my next break. And so that's what I did. I read Atlas Shrugged next, when school got out. Over winter break, we had to study for finals. But when school got out in May, that's when I sat down and read Atlas Shrugged, again, nonstop. Now, as far as saying a few other things, I thought it was interesting, the idea of Rourke as being someone, who does not have the kinds of questions or flaws or problems that maybe some other people do. And this might make him perhaps problematic as a model. And I basically just wanted to point to that passage in chapter 14 where Rourke does have that kind of problem. He's walking in the streets and he's thinking, who's his enemy? Is it maybe any man he met in the street? he looks at the buildings going up that he's not building. He thinks of, what would it be to be beaten? What would it be to be given up? Now, again, that's chapter 14. And this is not the whole book. And he does get past that, but still, even Howard Rourke, and it's because of what he sees around him, but it doesn't defeat him. He still does, and he has many, many obstacles and many, many challenges, and none of these things stop him because he can't be stopped. But it's not that emotionally he can't have the awareness that I'm in trouble. I'm in a certain kind of, not, existentially trouble, but this is a hard path. This is a hard path. And if it's hard for Rourke, well, it would certainly be hard. It might defeat other people, but he can win. And part of the splendor of the book is that as we go through it, we meet all sorts of other people who have some understanding of who he is, and then that for good or ill, and then we see who they are by the way that they respond to him. I mean, Mrs. Keating thinks that he's going to break all the furniture in her house. Well, that tells us something about her. Okay. The dean is afraid. Would you please put that down? You are dangerous. And, to whom? Well, yes, he's dangerous to the dean. And then, of course, there's Austin Heller, who looks at what Rourke does to the building, the drawing of the building. And now he knows about him and he hires him. And it's the best friend he's ever had. So, all the way through, the way that people judge him, even visually. Well, remember at the party, Dominique says what she thinks is the most obvious thing about how he's terribly good looking. And Kiki Hokum says, what? And Dominique realizes that what made his face the face of a god to her is something completely invisible to Kiki Hokum, which, I mean, she married Hokum. She wasn't born Hokum, but I guess she picked Kiki for herself, ridiculous name that for a ridiculous person. So I think when we get to the moment when Winan meets Rourke, that's pretty interesting to us, because now we're going to find out everything about Winan, including what we knew before and what we didn't know, because he had said to Dominique, there's never met the man who could break me. Okay, well, let's stay tuned. Let's see how that goes. So the whole book really, I did read it straight through, but I think even if I'd had to spread it out, I could have tried to hold it together. And I have to say, when I teach it to my students, I don't tell them they have to read it in 4 days. I spread it out in pieces and so on, but do try to help them keep it together. And I do tell them, well, you're going to remember this is the year you read The Fountainhead. And this is an important book.
Sorry, I have to ask, did you read it in 4 days?
Yes, but not nights. See, without the Shrugged, I read that in 2 days, but that included nights. I don't believe it either, but I know it happened because, that's because I remember when I finished Atlas Shrugged, I wanted some more books right away. And my nice dad went out to the library and brought home a bunch of more of her books for me. But yeah, that was 2 days, but that included nights. And with The Fountainhead, I didn't read it at night. I slept at night and I had family around, so it was 4 days, but there were other things going on. But I read it all, I did not skip anything. And with Atlas Shrugged, I didn't skip the speech either. I didn't, I knew from The Fountainhead that you can't skip anything. And that she doesn't write a book in which you can skip things and you would miss it. So I guess if I wanted to tie it back together to our theme about the courage to face a lifetime, I would say something about that beautiful expression, which is that in the draft, she'd written, Rourke never knew that he had stopped someone from committing suicide, which is a much grimmer way of looking at that statement. But again, Ayn Rand tended to change the negative into the positive as she's continuing to work on her writing. And that's how it is that we have the Secondhand Lives title for the book, the negative turning into The Fountainhead, which is the positive. And the courage to face a lifetime, well, it's all the way through the book. People have the opportunity to find the courage to face a lifetime, as we do as readers. And it comes just before one of my favorite bits in the book, which is the description of the building of Monadnock Valley, and people who had worked for Rourke before, and they come together and they're working, and it's a crusade, and it's the best time of their lives, and it's the year that it was spring forever because of the man who stood on guard over the valley and over them. And and it's the the method of his thought, the rule of its functioning, not the content of the thought, but the way he thinks. And that's the fountainhead, that's the guard, that's what gives them and all of us the courage to face a lifetime. And you see, when Ayn Rand was writing that, that was the best year of her life, because she had the contract and she had a year to finish the whole thing. And she wasn't even done with part 2. And so that was the year that she worked day and night without stopping. And I think it's not an accident that, it's just extremely coherent because it comes out of that imagination. So this is not my first copy, but as you can see, it's a very well-loved copy. This is my teaching copy. And my first copy was the one with Frank O'Connor's picture on the cover. And it's pretty marked up too. But because that one didn't have the same pagination when I started teaching the Fountainhead, I've used this one ever since. And I guess you could say that if Howard Roark gave the boy the courage to face a lifetime, for me, this was a book that set me on the right path with how to read everything. And so you could say it gave me the courage to face a library. That's it.
Thank you, Shoshana. So something very interesting with Shoshana, you might have read the book 5 times. So one of my favorite scenes in the Fountainhead is the last one. I don't want to give spoiler. 5 times going through it, I never spotted what you mentioned, which is the book starts and ends with Roark's on high. So yes. Okay, so this is one thing to say, go read Shoshana's essays on the relevant books. Another thing to say, when we say that Shoshana is joining a reading group, you have to want to be part of this reading group. So another plug for the Friday with the Living group. Only thing you need to do to attend is you have to be a member of ARC UK. So I'm just mentioning, you're gonna gain a lot of value, both from Andrea, who is running it, but also from guest stars like Shoshana. Okay, enough with patting our own back. Let's go to Josh.
Okay, that's great. It's been really delightful to hear Shoshana, Gina, and Andy give their takes on the Fountainhead. And I'll just try and sort of add my own take and try not to repeat what other people have said. But, I do have to say, when I was 15, I read the Fountainhead for the first time. And it was one of those really seminal and formative experiences of my life. Similar to the first time I skateboarded when I was, say, 8 or 9, the first time I surfed a wave, the first time I fell in love, the first time I really played the drums or the guitar. I'd had these moments that, will stick in my mind for the rest of my life, and what was, I think really, when I reflect back on it now, is up until that point, the only art form that really resonated with me was music. I used to sit I had a period in my life where I was brought up by my grandparents, and I used to sit at my grandfather's sort of by his store, and he used to play the piano. He was an amazing pianist, and he used to play quite sort of sophisticated Fats Waller type jazz, which was quite sophisticated for a sort of 5-year-old. But I just loved the whole sense of life and how much he loved playing it. And so I had music had this massive imprint on me. And I was a pretty talented artist when I was a kid. I didn't put enough, I don't think I loved drawing and painting enough to really go for it, but I had the sort of technical skills. But I didn't know that other forms of art could be quite so powerful. And then I read The Fountainhead, and it floored me in that sense. I didn't know that you could enter another world and just live in that world while you were flicking the pages. And that world, I fell in love with Dominique. I didn't want Howard Roark to be my friend, but I just wanted to kind of have him in my life somehow. I hated Tui. I was currently at the time at a sort of very traditional Victorian style English boarding school. And so everybody was being trained to be a Peter Keating. And I loathed that. I loathed it at the time, but I didn't have the language to describe why. I'd been sort of very mildly Christian when I was about 10. And by the time I was 12, I was an atheist. And I was sort of searching for a form of spirituality that I was kind of a bit bereft and lost. And I found it in this book. So, you know, these are some of the real, and also something else that was very important for me is my mum's grandfather was one of the Gale Winans of the world at the time. He was probably the biggest press baron of all time. He had the largest newspaper in the whole world. This is, you know, in the 1920s and 30s. And he gave all his money away when he died. So he put it, he believed that you had to earn your own money. He didn't want to create what we often see, these families that tear each other apart. I think the family still tore itself apart afterwards anyway, because he didn't give it all away. But that was very interesting to see concretize someone who I'd sort of heard about, you know, similar type of person I'd heard about. So that was just like an aside. So that, you know, this was a really, really powerful moment for me reading this book. And also I just loved it. I just loved the story. I loved the characters, the tension. I remember sort of crying when Howard Roark just put the photographs on the judge's table. You know, there are many, many scenes that stuck with me. And like Andy, it's my favorite novel of all time. I don't know if it's the best novel. I wonder if Atlas trumps it. But for me, I think partly because of what it meant to my life and how much I valued it. And you know, reading Atlas was just really cool and just, you know, took things to another level. But this is was the book that really changed things to me. And I just want to fast forward to now. You know, what does the Fountainhead mean to me now? Well, on top of all of that, you know, I do a lot of work in rehab. I do a lot of work around what's in sort of rehab terms is called codependence, which is sometimes also referred to as pathological altruism or compulsive helping. There's many sort of terms that are sort of thrown at this, and I often do quite a lot of talks for Ayn Rand Centre UK, and at the end, you know, in the Q&A and stuff, people ask me, you know, do you have any good books on codependence so I can understand this better? And I'll say, yeah, you can read Facing Codependency by Pierre Melody, and you can, you know, and so on. And there are some good books out there. But I say, if you really want to look into this and really understand, the best psychological book I know on codependence is The Fountainhead. And people ask why, and it goes down much better in at an Ayn Rand Centre UK event than, you know, in a group full of early recovery addicts. But every so often you get something that gets through. And I was facilitating a group last Friday, and it's amazing how things trickle through, because someone said, and this is someone I only know from facilitating groups, I'm not his counselor, I've never done any one-to-one therapy with them, I've never mentioned Ayn Rand, although I've introduced Ayn Rand very kind of subtly into some talks on happiness. And this person was feeding back to someone else in the group, you need to be more selfish, but you need to be the right kind of selfish, you know what I mean? And it explained it, and I was like, great, job done. You know, that work that I'd subtly been introducing, and maybe they got it from somewhere else as well, but I doubt it. You could trace that lineage back to me reading The Fountainhead at 15, and that person is probably going to get well. And so, you know, this is one way I just wanted to put out to those of you who are interested in maybe watching the series that we put together on the psychology of Fountainhead characters is, you know, the Fountainhead is not just a piece of art that I use to boost my soul. It's something that I'm starting to use in my work that is literally saving people's lives. And, you know, I think that's fantastic. I just want to finish up on this. It does tie back into what a few people have said already. Is I do often ask myself, and have done since 15, what would Howard Roark do now? When I have a dilemma, or I'm struggling, or, you know, I need some kind of resilience boost. That's my, you know, if I was younger, it would have been probably James Bond or someone like that, or one of the characters that I read in the comics that I liked when I was much younger. But I still think, you know, what would Howard Roark do here? It's interesting. I don't think what would John Galt do, or Francisco do, for me, it's what would Howard Roark do? And I think maybe it's partly because of the impact the book made to me, and maybe there's something a little bit more concrete to me about Howard Roark. I'm not sure, but as a resilience tool, as a sort of external resource I can draw upon, nothing for me comes closer than, aside from the things that I've done myself that I'm proud of, but I'm thinking of something that is external to me that I can draw upon. He's still there for me all the time. He never fails to give me that boost, and that's another example of how the Fountainhead is still one of the most relevant and important books in my life. And so I just wanted to put that out as maybe a slightly on top of what everyone else has said, and hopefully a way of drawing you in to start watching the series we put together. Because I have to say, I know we're not going into the details of this series, but I was there to sort of facilitate and to be a part of the conversation. And I thought I knew a lot, and I know a fair amount, but the amount I learned from Gina, Shoshana, and Andy was just fantastic and priceless. And I really, really enjoyed being part of this. And I very much doubt any of you will not enjoy being a part of it too, as the audience, because that's the reward we're going to get back from putting all this hard work in. And I really look forward to your questions and comments, and you all sharing the amazing content and value of this series. So, and hats off to Razi for getting it organized. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Joe. So Razi, by the way, can you remind us? Oh, you just did. Okay.
Yeah. I just posted in the Zoom chat for the people on Zoom the link to the first episode. By the way, I said it's this Friday at 10 p.m. UK time. It premieres this Friday at 10 p.m. UK time. You can watch it. It's going to be on YouTube forever, or until we're removed from there. But yes, so but you can click that link. I'll post it in the live chat on YouTube as well. So you can click that. You can sign up to it and set a reminder. And Nikos.
So let's open now the floor for questions, and we start with Marina. Do I have to unmute here? Let's see now.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't talk until you unmute me. So my question is, why would you choose to go back to Roark or any other character instead of going back to Ayn Rand's original thinking? There's a lot of written about it. She's also been questioned to death and interrogated from anywhere from Donahue show to many, many other shows. And she's written almost on any topic or subject. So I'm confused. Why would you use a fictional character with a very narrow example versus the writer herself?
And this reminds me also another criticism to Rand herself. Why in your non-fiction books you use lines from Gold? But let's stick to Marina's question, and then mine's like an afterthought. Sorry, Susana, and then Josh.
Okay, well, I wasn't the one who said that I looked to him as a model for behavior. As opposed to Ayn Rand, for one thing, it's not either or. I mean, we can learn ideas from many people. What I think is true as far as a fictional character is that it's a dramatic illustration, someone acting in real life. But I guess I would say that I like fictional characters. And I think that as a portrayal of a moral ideal, in the round, that's something you can see in a fictional character, especially since you see the character presented without a lot of distraction and noise, and in terms of essentials. But in fact, ultimately, for deciding what you want to do in your life, you need to look at your own values. And so it's not actually that you're seeking it. Let's see. I mean, Ayn Rand does not do Abby. Howard Roark is not our advice giver, and yet I think that sometimes a fictional character can show you in dramatic form the intensity. Oh yes, just in the way. Here's maybe a way of thinking about it. Not so much in terms of thinking about your own decision, but in thinking in general. You could look at an action and think, is that something Howard Roark would do, and why not? And that can even be a way of understanding why he does the things that he does. What wouldn't fit with that? Now, that you can't do that with all fictional characters, but I think you can with Ayn Rand's characters, that they, well, as he says, he's, integrity. He has integrity, and this, and that's part of what he's there to show us. He speaks about integrity, he is integrity. And so you look at him, and and every action is an expression of that integrity, which is why he would not agree to alterations in his buildings, because that's a change in the whole. So I think that could be a reason why a fictional character could be easy to imagine. But you can't just look at the character. You need to think, all right, what about that character leads to the behavior, the principles, the essentials, the way of life. But again, I wasn't the one who said I looked to him as a model. I'll actually, if I have to actually do something difficult, something that I know what I want to do, but I'm trying to get myself in the proper frame of mind, I actually think of not literary characters, but actors. I mean, I got John Wayne up there, picture John Wayne. I think of John Wayne. John Wayne would not have any trouble with any of the things that might worry me. And, I just, John Wayne, Cary Grant, Clint Eastwood, I think about how they would speak and so on. So I'm not going to do it for you right now because I'm being myself, but I find that kind of useful also, just in terms of imagining what the picture might look like. But of course, they're not, as human beings, they don't necessarily embody every value that you might wish, nor would you go to them for advice.
By the way, Gina, obviously you can be part of this round of Q&A. Josh or Gina, whoever wants to contribute something.
I mean, it's a great question. I just talking from my own personal experience, Howard Roark was the emotional imprint at that age that is really, comes to mind. It's not to say that one is better than the other there. It's just that's what, works for me, because I had that real emotional attachment to that at that stage. And I can sort of switch that on in the moment. I go to Ayn Rand all the time for all sorts of things, and philosophical anything, but just having this representation in my mind as something to draw upon. Like some people have a cross around their neck or a bangle or all sorts of things. I have an imprint of Howard Roark that just gives me that little boost, and that's the why.
And also there are more concrete situations. So for example, it's difficult to say, what would Ayn Rand do if you're in love with a person, but let's say they're not ready yet because they have the wrong premises, whereas you have the picture from the book. So it's that way it's easier. Gina, do you want to comment on that?
Sure, though I don't know if Lisa's there now, and I don't want to put her on the spot, but I would love to hear her speak to this.
Yeah, we have to say that there have been comments asking for Lisa to comment on that.
I think she would nail this one.
For people who just listen to it, we're referring to Lisa Van Damme.
Yes, sorry. But I mean, I agree with what Shoshana and Josh have said. I guess one more angle from which maybe to look at it is, think of why Rand herself wrote these novels and the value that she derived from it. That she talked about that she's primarily not a philosopher, not a cultural commentator. She's primarily a novelist, and everything else is a means to that end. And why did she write novels? She wanted to create the kind of world and the kinds of characters, that she wants to see made real. And I think what you get, oh, thank you, Lisa. Take your time. All the better. It'll just be, anyway, no pressure. But I think, again, I absolutely don't think that we should be looking exclusively to Roark or to, a fictional character, especially for concrete life guidance. I think that's fraught with all kinds of potential problems, even just kind of thinking about it in that way. Just as Roark says, your first mistake was coming to me for advice, right? Even the Roark of kind of the fictional real life universe where he lived. He's telling Keating, like, don't let me make this decision for you. This is your life. These are your priorities, your preferences. Like, how would I know which is the better option for you, right? So the same holds, obviously, in thinking about his fictional example, but what you get uniquely from a fictionalized portrayal, which is deliberately essentialized, as Shoshana was saying, such that it strips away all the kind of accidental details of any given life, including those of Rand's life, where, I mean, I know people often will bring up the affair and how confusing it is that, why did she fall for it for so long? And then like wading through all the weeds is like, well, what actually happened there? And all of these complicated intrigues and dramas and who knew what when, and her working through the, and whatever like complicated psychological emotional baggage all the characters involved, were bringing with them, and like trying to sort through that and think like, well, who, like, could she have known or figured this out sooner? And what were the choices? Like, she wouldn't have written that episode of her life that way, probably, right? Like, she would have processed it and then really thought through, like, what were the essentials here? And how do I really kind of narrativize and really understand what happened in a way that then can guide me on other analogous situations and can really help me understand it in terms of the fundamental principles involved, right? And that's what she's done with Rourke. That's what she's done in the fiction. She's shown us the narrativized, the shorn down to essentials, like, as Andy was saying, there's no accident in her characterization of Rourke. And so when we think of that symbol, when we kind of call upon that emotional kind of anchor, as Josh was describing, that we're asking ourselves, like, what would someone who embodies this complex set of abstract principles for living life that I have over time through a lot of thought come to endorse do in this situation? But it condenses all of that into a person we know and can quickly call up into our minds as one unit, just like you can do with a person. Sorry, Lisa would have, again, a much more articulate way of putting that, but
thank you. So Marilyn says she wants to see her ideal man brought to life. So yeah, that's yes, materializing in the fiction. So till Lisa gathers her thoughts to reply to the call of the people for a comment, let me ask one question to all of you. So something which I found fascinating is, how can someone who is a good person with good premises get so deep in the dark parts of dark people like Toohey, for example, or in other novels, other bad people? So we know that Rand had real life, let's say, examples like Lasky or Mumford, but the closest that it got, I think, is he watched some lectures from them. So how can psychologically someone get so deep in the dark premises of the bad guys without being a bad guy? And this is not going to Rand was a bad person, therefore she knew about that. It's the opposite. If you're not a bad person, how can you go so deep, and by the age of, I think, in your 30s, to understand such a deep evil, such as the dark soul of Toohey?
Sorry, just so you said to understand such a deep evil, or to...
First of all, to understand it, so to see deep into it. So, for example, during that time, we have people like Mises or Hayek trying to explain a bit what lies behind a socialist. And someone puts Dostoevsky, I assume you mean The Damned. Yes, so he did this as well. But how can you, without being a bad person, see this dark thing? Or even with, for example, with Wynand, that thought that he had when he's in the ocean, like, oh, I could just drive away and leave Rourke here forever. Of course, immediately he says, oh my God, what did I think? But the mere fact that you grasp this thought, how can you psychologically see evil so deeply without being, let's say, a psychoanalyst who have spent years and years and years and years with people who reveal to you this dark side?
Shoshana, do you want to go? Or I can speak to some of the psychological aspect of this, but you'll be able to speak to the literary.
Okay, well, I guess what I would say is that she thinks of Rourke first, and then she does the opposite. And I think that she's got a really deep understanding of what it means to be Rourke. That it's sometimes people simply think that Rourke is a nonconformist, but there's more to it than that. He's got a soul. He knows who he is. He knows what he wants. He has integrity. And Ellsworth Toohey, there's actually nothing inside. He doesn't have any desires, which is why, it's the ultimate form of not having a self is having to find action by controlling other people. And I think the part that was really brilliant on her part is that she realized that for Toohey, the desire for power means that he can't stand Rourke because Rourke is the person he could never control. And that's why, when he takes a look at Rourke and he thinks of his own death, as I said, Rourke is the one that you can tell about everybody from. So I think that's kind of where Toohey comes from. Now, as far as Lasky, whom she saw, that's where she got the mannerisms and the humor, the not wanting. Now, you see, someone could be Toohey without every aspect of that, just as someone could be Rourke in a way without being an architect. But the characterization, she did take a look at Lasky, and she read some writers who had, that I don't know, certain element of making big things appear accessible and trivial, and so she, but that again, psychologically, that goes along with Toohey, that just as he wants to bring Rourke down, he also wants to bring all greatness down and all big subjects down to something in little pieces that he can make jokes about. So, that's Toohey. And what we actually see him doing during the book is that he's a big talker. I think that he probably has more to say than Rourke does. I mean, I haven't actually counted the lines, but there's, Rourke talks in his buildings until he, talks to Wynand, talks in the speech, but Toohey works by words. And, Ayn Rand's a writer, and so she can write, once she knows who the character is, she can write words for him. Interestingly, she doesn't give us as much of an internal life for Toohey, because he doesn't, what's just for, he's not interested in himself in the same way. He doesn't have the kind of active mental questions that other people do. And so he's what is it that he's called? He's the voice. That's actually how we first meet him, right? Is that he's giving us a big speech, and then we see what he looks like in person, which is small and scrawny and weak.
So, but you mentioned that he doesn't feel anything on that speech, or at least that's how it's in the audible. Toohey starts saying, "My friends, my brothers," and at some point it looks like he's even drawn to his persona. So do you think that Toohey, for example, when he sees protests in the streets, imagine like a socialist revolution, don't you think he'd get like his hair up? Or do you think even to that he would be cynical and consider it?
Mission accomplished. I did it, good. But he doesn't have any friends. I mean, he says, "My friends." He doesn't have any friends. He doesn't love anything. He doesn't care about anything. Even he picks out the statue of Dominique to send to Wynand, but he doesn't actually appreciate art.
That he can understand art.
Even there, he thought that he was he was sending the statue to make Wynand interested in the woman rather than the sculptor. That's, yeah.
Right.
Well, actually, it worked. Anyway, because Dominique herself is like what Mallory portrayed in her, but it isn't. Actually, that was what Wynand was surprised at, that he, better taste than I thought, and then he realized what Toohey's actual purpose was. Now, I think that you could say he understands art in the sense of he knows what he wants to destroy. I mean, when he sees Rourke's building, he understands it, but he doesn't love it. He just hates it. He doesn't love anything. He just wants to destroy. He's a nihilist. So how does Ayn Rand understand that? I think it comes from, turning Rourke upside down because Toohey is the opposite of Rourke in a stronger way than Keating is the opposite of Rourke? That's why he's the opposite, yeah.
So before we go to Josh and Gina, some interesting comments. So Jack says he was a genius. Sutherland says virtuoso of integration by induction. So observing individuals and connecting ideas to words and actions and relating those to the corresponding internal life philosophy. And Bob says there's a sense in which you do not really understand free will if you cannot understand how someone can be evil. Ayn Rand's understanding of free will explains to a great extent how she could understand evil. That's, yeah, these are interesting perspectives. So let's see if our psychologists can help us a bit here. So Josh and then Gina.
Well, something I was going to echo what Sutherland has written in the chat, the virtuoso of integration. I think she would have. Don't forget, she went through the Russian Revolution. She saw a lot of people and grown up with a lot of people, went through educational establishments and stuff in Russia. So she must have observed and seen various forms of these characters. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, Shoshana, but I think so. I think Tolstoy was asked, how did he write war so well? And if you'd never seen war before. And he responded something like, I saw some people having a fight in the street and I extrapolated from that. And she would have been doing that all the time. It goes back to what Sutherland was saying, this virtuoso of integration and differentiation and just combine. I would have thought she would have taken things apart and recombined them, like Shoshana was saying. So I think that's how she would do it. And that's what I would like to add to that. And I'd like to, look forward to hearing what Gina has to say.
So are you passing the mic over?
Yeah,
now?
I'm passing the mic.
So, yeah. So I'm just going to build on what everyone said, which I think is very reasonable. Just one element, which is the inward facing element that we can understand. I mean, this is very related to what Mr. Stubblefield was saying, but we have the capacity for evil, every single one of us in us, right? Just as much as we have the capacity for good. And that's not some remote, like far-fetched, crazy fantasy. I think in most of our lives, we surely have all at some point evaded. We surely have all at some point either chickened out or been very tempted to chicken out or masked the emotion we were really feeling as if it were another kind of more respectable emotion, felt like a twinge of envy or jealousy and told ourselves a story about that and tried to kind of rationalize it away. Now, the difference between us here, and a Toohey or a Keating is that we stop ourselves. We notice when that's happening. We strive to be better. We understand we have all these principles to help us to see the consequences, see where evasion and irrationality can lead over time and how destructive they can be and the misery and unhappiness that they can cause, so that we're motivated to work at building mental habits that kind of help us align our actions with our goals and our values, right? And to root out duties and altruistic premises from ourselves. But it's not far-fetched to imagine, I think, connecting up this point to the point about, to the Tolstoy line, watching a fight in the street and extrapolating, this is just to say that we can also watch those same conflicts, those same processes unfold in ourselves. And I think that's where we begin, is, with direct introspective evidence of how these different motivations and mental processes work. And then from there, we kind of recombine and we imagine, building much more intense or much more consistent, chains of events and causal sequences from there. But we start from our own experience.
Right. Okay. So Lisa gave us the answer in the text, so I'll go through it. So here's a quote by Rand herself. There is no way to integrate such a sum without projecting an actual human figure, an integrated concretization that illuminates the theory and makes it intelligible. And then Lisa elaborates, oh no, that's another quote. What would Rourke do in this situation? And faster than their mind could identify the proper application of all the complex principles involved. The image of Rourke gave them the answer. So, yeah, it's not, it's actually, do you people want to comment on this line and how it helps us to answer that question? Susana.
I would say that she's describing the way that some people respond to literary characters. I don't think that, she says it's essential. I think that it might not be essential for everyone to do that. I also, although, it's thinking of a literary character is very dramatic. I guess a question in my mind is, did she do that? She had her heroes. Did she, and her heroes are important for inspiration, especially for a sense of the world as being hospitable to a place where achievement is possible. But that's not the same thing as, what am I going to do? Oh, I'll think of this character that'll give me the image. I'm not sure she did that. I think that on the other hand, this might be a way that some people think, and usefully, and it is very dramatic, and it is a condensation of many things in one person. And she did write that. So yeah, she knew what that was like.
Yeah, and Marilyn mentions Cyrus, which I think Cyrus appears, he's somewhere, something like, not really preparing for a fight, but for some reason, when I think of Cyrus, I think our first image of Gail Wynan as a kid, which he's by the wall and preparing to being like fight ready. Anyway, Brian says, why wouldn't she be able to observe nihilism then, both during the revolution? Oh, okay, that's related to something that Marina asked. Marina, since I see your hand is still up, have you got a follow-up? You can unmute. Yeah.
Yes, I have a bunch of follow-ups. When you're talking about the revolution, she was 12 years old. She came from a reasonably well-to-do family. So she probably was not on the streets to be able to see a revolution. There was also no TV. I'm not even sure that the radio was active in St. Petersburg at the time of the revolution. And newspapers were not functioning very well. So to say that she's seen the revolution is certainly questionable at best. She also has an incredible ability to describe things that she has no clue about. In one of the, I can't think of the name of the movie now, the book that she wrote about the Second World War, she was not in Europe, she was in America. And she certainly describes it as she was in the middle of it. There was a bunch of other things, but I forgot now that you mentioned that I wanted to bring up. And, again, I think as much as she puts in her characters, it's still not a documentary where, again, when she answers her questions about her, when she's being questioned, to me, it's so much more valuable that I'm almost beginning to think that maybe it's a gender issue.
Thank you, Marina. So, comments.
Well, I mean, you're questioning whether she didn't say accurately what happened. I mean, she said, I'd seen the first shots of the February Revolution. If this is of any interest, it was rather dramatic. The house where we lived at that time was on a big public square. And you can see where the house was. We saw this mob gathering and filling the entire square, sea of faces, red banners. The first day nothing happened, the police just stood by. I mean, that sounds pretty firsthand. And what she saw. And then she talks about what happened on the second day and what the sword looked like and the policeman with. Anyway, I think that if she describes something in that amount of detail I guess if she were 2, she might not remember, but if she's 12 and she's remembering all of these details, it's from her, it's from her observation. So what can I say? You know, it's that she has memories of things that she's seen. Now in her fiction, We Living is not completely autobiographical. So everything that happens to Kira is not what happened to Ayn Rand, but she, you know, she was there. Well, again, she's got quite, she even says that she didn't know what happened because it was at the other side of the enormous square. So I think she's actually still does have at the time she did this, she talked about the armed soldiers and all the things, the fighting in the streets and lines of soldiers shooting down the street. You couldn't see at whom. I didn't see anyone falling. You know, it's she saw these things.
So Jack mentions the window. I was trying to find on Instagram. So there's an objectivist. There's a fan of Ayn Rand in Russia, Mikhail, and he has put the plaque at the house where Ayn Rand used to live. So the other day he sent me, and I hoped he also posted on Instagram, but it's not there. Anyway, this house is still there. The room is still the same. The window is the same. Now it's like a conference theater. If you see the window, because he sent me a photo from the window pointing outside. It's almost as if, you know how it is this suites on a football stadium where you have a glass and you see the whole field. It's a bit like that, one of the biggest streets in Petrograd. So yeah, we can discuss various things, for example, Second World War, but when it comes to the Russian Revolution, I think even historically, it fits. Okay, so right. So is there any other question from someone else? If the answer is no, I will ask our speakers if they have some parting words or something that they want the people, the crowd, the audience to remember. Otherwise, we'll go to Razi for parting words, or Razi can tell us a bit more about the project. So Razi, you said it premieres on Friday, right?
Yeah, so it premieres this Friday at 10 p.m. UK time. That's 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, and you can figure out if you're somewhere else. And also, Nikos, we should mention what's premiering Thursday, and that's going to be live, but I'm going to leave that to you because you're one of the 2 stars of that.
Yeah, so Thursday, we have the first show that deals with love, sex, and romance. So what we've noticed is that quite often in the Daily Objective, the daily show of Ayn Rand Center UK, some of the most popular shows are the ones that have to do anything with intergender dynamics, love, romance, sex, or the lack of love and sex. Last week we had something on incels. Back in the day we had something some weeks ago on so-called MGTOWs. After each episode, people are asking, we want more on that and something a bit longer. So with Gloria Alvarez, we start a show which is a live show which is based on romance, and it's called The Selfish Lovers. Now, the first episode is called Sleeping with the Enemy with a question mark, and we'll examine whether people can have relationships or build romances, either flings or something more serious, who knows, with people they fundamentally disagree with people that are of different values, different philosophies, different politics. So we would like you to be, we invite you to be in the audience of that show. It's going to be on YouTube. You can ask questions. And the way we envision it is that part of it is going to be me and Gloria chatting, but also we welcome the participation of the audience. Give us your experience from your romantic life or from things you know, if indeed romance requires some compatibility of values and some compatibility of political, let's say, a political affiliation. Anything else, Razi? Did I forget something about the show?
Yeah. So, no, you didn't forget anything about the show, but we do have some other upcoming stuff that I think people might be interested in. So next Next Monday, we had an event that was supposed to be next Monday. It's now next Wednesday, but we still might do something on Monday. So next Wednesday, we have Yaron Brook and Toby Young, who our British audience will know. He started the Free Speech Union. What is the title of that event, Nikos? I forget. It's something like censorship on social media.
Are social media censoring you?
Yeah. And I think Toby, and even though he started the Free Speech Union, I think he and Yaron have probably different definitions of free speech. So that's going to be an interesting event. The following week, we have a talk by Lee Pearson on AI. The week after that, we have Craig Biddle and Douglas Murray on the foundations of ethics. So we have a lot of interesting stuff coming up. By the way, The Selfish Lovers is going to be every Thursday. The Psychology of the Fountainhead Characters is going to be every Friday for 8 weeks. And as Nikos mentioned, Ayn Rand Center UK members are welcome to join our discussion group on We the Living, which is Fridays, and also our discussion group on Leonard Peikoff's courses, which is run by Nikos. So we're trying to do as much as possible. Our membership has grown quite a bit in recent weeks, and we appreciate.
So the message is, at whatever level you are interested in, you might be interested mostly in the novels, you might be interested mostly in the non-fiction. So the idea of the new membership, let's say, of the new program, of the new schedule and content of ARC UK is that whatever you're interested in, there's something for you. So I encourage you to become members, because there's a lot of value to be gained for you on that. Last week we had the whole episode where we actually introduced even more new projects. There's no time now to go through them, but it's something that you're gonna get value out of it for your life. So yeah, do it. It's a good thing to do.
Yeah, and again, I want to thank our speakers today for this great event and for this great series that's coming up. Well, the rest of you will judge it when you see it, but I can definitely say that I enjoyed being a part of it from behind the scenes, and I'm sure you'll all enjoy watching it. Thanks again for everybody who's here. We're gonna go off of YouTube, but those of us who are on Zoom, the call will remain open for a while. So
okay, I need also to leave. So thanks so much to the speaker. Thanks to those who attend, and thanks for us for organizing it.
And thanks to our viewers on YouTube. For YouTube, we'll be back tomorrow with the Daily Objective. Nikos and Rucka will do their 1,000 subscriber thing where they dress up. So that should be interesting.
Okay, bye everyone.